So just to make it clear, this discourse of protecting Jews, of protecting Semites, is really not about us. It's about those who are in power.
Possible and to have to see all of you here, full room, is amazing. Thank you for being here. Just excited to share more about this project later. And yeah, I hope you're having a good time and I don't know, hang out. Thank you.
Aku tinggal di Jerman sini dari 10 tahun yang lalu. Dan kemarin kebetulan teman aku Lina yang aku interview di video yang ini, dia ngajak aku ke event tentang perspektif dari Yahudi tentang isu di Palestina ini. Karena aku penasaran juga gimana sih Jewish ini mereka memaknai identitas dan posisi mereka dalam isu Palestina ini. Soalnya topik ini cukup rumit dan sering dipolitisasi. Jadi di diskusi panel di video ini kita akan lebih tahu perspektif dari mereka.
In Germany, which continues to weaponize and flatten Jewish identities, in what way your Jewishness has informed your stance on Palestine?
I was studying exactly this topic. I was interested in my research. I did ethnographic research where I was interested to see how encounters between Muslims and Jews really take shape. And I ended up showing through different examples that whenever this encounter takes place as if it has been designed to address so-called Muslim anti-Semitism, will be celebrated by politicians, will be celebrated by the media, will have access to public money, will have access to rooms. But whenever we meet each other as equals, meaning also to reflect what is it that we Jews know about Muslims, know about Arabs, and specifically what is it that we know about Palestinians, then those who are in power will point at us with a finger, calling us self-hating Jews, anti-Semites, and subject us literally to boycott, divestment, sanctions, state repression, police brutality, and so on and so on. So the discourse, to come to the point, discourse is not really designed to protect Jews as Jews. It is being designed to protect only those Jews who are willing and able to reproduce anti-Muslim discourse.
You know, at the age of 15, because I had older siblings, I became active against apartheid in South Africa, and I've had 25-year career in photography or art world. That's all based on kind of racial justice or, you know, ethical issues. I've been in war zones, I've been in refugee camps, but what happened in the last 2 years in Germany is my identity has been flattened out. So it's been flattened out to, in the words of the Commission of Anti-Semitism in Hamburg, I'm a hateful anti-Semite who advocates for terrorism against Jews. That summarizes my character, right? Which also flattens out as kind of what's built into me, and we were talking about it before, what drives us towards these ethical battles. And is that part of my Judaism? I'm not sure. That's just always been in me. It doesn't matter where it is in the world. But suddenly here I find myself kind of described in these horrible one-liners. And I think, and even what it does is it undermines the intersectional possibilities of these struggles. The fact that you do have solidarity towards Palestine or work in Palestine or critical of Zionism. Wow. And I think how those struggles intersect with, other indigenous struggles or climate emergency we've been deprived of that intersectionality.
Jadi Jewish di Jerman ini tuh banyak juga yang mendukung Palestina dan mereka disebutnya kayak lefty Jewish. Tapi mereka di Jerman sini juga sering diserang identitasnya dan disederhanakan untuk kepentingan politik di Jerman sini.
When all started to kind of question the us versus them security narrative, which is so prevalent in the Zionist project, but also part of the journey as well.
It derives first and foremost from my own personal family experience. Something I share together with Adam also, that our grandparents, they survived the Holocaust in Lithuania. Despite Germany, applies actually first and foremost to Palestinians right now. And the Jews here is just one of those social groups that suffer from this idea of Germany, or those who reproduce this idea of Germany that always define itself by excluding some other social groups. So we have Jews, we have Sinti, we have Romas, we have queer people, we have political opponents, we have black people, we have Asians, we have all sorts of groups that would not necessarily feel themselves represented by the way powerful politicians nowadays speak about this idea of Germany, precisely the one idea of Germany that emerges in its attempt to justify, legitimize, and neutralize a genocide.
Di jawaban ini aku lihat dia menyoroti bahwa di Jerman sini narasi keamanan itu dipakai negara untuk melindungi Zionisme. Dan narasi keamanan ini juga menyingkirkan suara-suara kritis, terutama yang membela atau yang mendukung Palestina. Dan hal ini ngebuka mata bahwa konsep keamanan ini bukan jadi hal yang benar-benar ngelindungin, jadi perlindungan, melainkan jadi alat kekuasaan.
If we're talking about the kind of materiality of losing stuff or speaking out on the most devastating end, you've got obviously what's happening to Palestinians with their whole bloodlines being wiped out for coming up to 2 years. But then a lot of Germans are still scared, right, of saying something because they might lose social status or their job or their circle of friends. But I'm assuming a lot of you have also lost things. At what point were you willing to lose what you've lost in order to stand up for Palestine and question how you had been brought up as, with Israel being the kind of the insurance policy and the intergenerational trauma that feeds into that as a place that is ultimately safe?
My first work that was done in Israel and Palestine was a book with Eyal Weizmann back in 2004, 2003 or 4. And we showed that work in America, and the museum was sued by the Anti-Defamation League for accusing Israel of ethnic cleansing. And the museum responded by taking down the kind of the museum quotes and put them first-person quotes, so we became liable, and had kind of Ronald Lauder of the Estee Lauder fortune suing us. So that was kind of like more than 20 years ago. And then I've got even more complex stories where my sister left apartheid South Africa, mostly running away from my over-domineering Jewish mother, but she landed up in Israel and married a kind of militant Zionist who she met on a kibbutz, and whose son has now been in Gaza a number of times over the last 3 years. So when you talk about losing things, I've never had a kind of career in America because of that instance. I've had one conversation with my sister since October 7th. And then, so it's kind of like, I talked about this frequency, it kind of keeps going up and down, but it's not a new thing. I think the newest thing for me was back in January 23, just after Documenta, when I arrived back from just burying my mother, who had second-generation Holocaust survivor. And there were all these accusations from the Commission of Anti-Semitism, then led to me losing my professorship. So this experience of kind of gaslighting, mostly because I'm, you know, a white heterosexual man who's been able to stomp their way through with privilege around the world. I hadn't really experienced gaslighting to that extent, and I think this was a big shock, at how disorientating that is. When there's every single major newspaper or media outlet is kind of describing you in one way, which is just, you know, kind of so baffling. And I think orientation is kind of the biggest thing that I've lost, where I'll find myself, even now, every couple of weeks, I'll just be like, where I always felt like such conviction and clarity, even now I'm a bit like, you know what I mean, unsure.
No, I think after I met some Palestinians, I mean, when I was like maybe a liberal, I describe myself as a liberal lefty, I guess. And I thought they were very angry at me, so I thought, okay, I need to look at this and see why they were so angry at me, because I thought I was such a good leftist. This was like in my 20s, in my beginning of the 20s. So I went to read, and like when I started reading, so especially at the beginning, the first years of the conflict, like the 20s of the 20th century, let's say. So it made me understand that the divisions that we have between Israelis and Palestinians aren't so obvious. Like it could have changed. Like it could have been different. There were other groups like Brit Shalom, for example, and Iraqi Jews who always challenged this. They challenged this separation between Israelis and Palestinians, or you know, if they were themselves like Arab Jews that were living in Palestine, so they also challenged it. So that's when I started thinking about it. And now jumping to the present, or like a year and a half ago, and this is connected to gaslighting, by the way, when my brother was killed on October 7th, so I had all of the Israeli media, and until now, you know, I spoke to many media over the world, but I never spoke to media in Israel because I didn't want to hear what I said. And this was like the gaslighting. Like just today, I was speaking to this woman, Israeli woman, and I wrote to her, and I wrote, yes, I told her my brother was killed because of this settlement project or whatever. And she was like, no, your brother was killed because he was a Jew living in Israel. And like, you know, she's like a secular Jew. She's not even a religious Jew. But, you know, like, they somehow convinced them, like everyone's convinced that my brother was killed because he was a Jew. And I told her, no, my brother was killed because there was someone who was living in a prison and had a very difficult life. And this rage and this difficulties made him do bad things to other people. I mean, so even even the narrative of the death of my brother they want to take from me, they want to say, no, you don't know why your brother was killed. Your brother was killed because he was Jewish, because he was in Israel, because of this. Even secular Jews. I mean, and this is very hurtful because people tell me, you don't sound like a person that their brother was killed on 7th of October. Like, how is someone supposed to sound? Like, you totally own the narrative and gaslight me. And this is connected also to the security, because as long as there won't be security for Palestinians in Gaza or in Palestinians in the West Bank, so there won't be security for any of us.
Dari jawaban-jawaban ini nunjukin bahwa kalau kita bersuara buat Palestina memang beresiko besar, bukan cuma kita kehilangan relasi atau karir, pekerjaan, tapi kita juga kehilangan kendali atas narasi pribadi diri kita sendiri. Karena di konteks Jerman tuh merasa bersalah atas kejadian yang menimpa Israel pada masa lalu. Di kritik-kritik yang ditujukan kepada Israel itu dibungkam karena rasa bersalahnya. If that makes sense.
Die Welt newspaper once claimed that Free Palestine is the new Heil Hitler. What do you think Germany's memory culture could look like if Palestine was actually free from German guilt?
So I think what Germany, one of the many problems that are characteristic to the idea of Germany is anti-Semitism. And I mean it not in order to just say this term again and again, but really because it comes to that what Germans do not allow room for are those Jews who perceive themselves as equal to Palestinians, to Arabs, to Muslims, who can imagine their Jewishness beyond Europe. Those Jews who live their Jewishness in its full Semitic legacy. Germany's discourse of fighting anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism does not concern the experiences of the Semites. It does not concern the experiences of Jews. It is designed to identify the alleged anti-Semite, and those who are in charge of managing the situation are the anti-Semites. And you have those anti-Semites in the parliament who pass resolutions allegedly in order to protect the Semites, and you have it within the institutions that were installed, how it's called, the Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. You find this position, these offices on all governing level in Germany nowadays, on federal level, with Felix Klein, on state level, on municipal level, even within the executive body of the state, for example, within the Berliner police, and you find it also within universities by now. I would not be surprised if you would find it also in Siemens and in Bosch and stuff like this. So just to make it clear, this discourse of protecting Jews, of protecting the Semites, is really not about us. It's about those who are in power.
Jadi ternyata di Jerman sini, narasi perlindungan terhadap Yahudi bisa dipakai untuk membungkam suara orang Yahudi sendiri yang kritis. Ini benar-benar ironis dan menyedihkan sih.
If given the chance, how would you reform Germany's state anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism apparatus? I mean, I know I'm sure you've got something to say on that, Adam. Didn't you once want to be like an anti-Semitism commissioner?
Yeah, so I did a kind of performative piece where I was running for Commissioner of Anti-Semitism and did say I'm much more qualified. And, you know, I've got two little kids who are Jewish, and real anti-Semitism is really on the rise in this country. And I do worry about it, but they're not addressing that. It's very clear what they're addressing. And like you say, you know, they're dividing us into the good Jews and the bad Jews, and the bad Jews are like, at best, what we would do is just, you know, voluntarily exit the country. That's what they'd like us to do. And it's amazing, like, the apparatus they throw, right, which is, there's like 3 or 4 journalists, and we all got together, a bunch of us artists and academics and intellectuals who've all been cancelled or, you know, charged or whatever. And we found that these little handful of journalists were all doing the same strategy. They were going through our social media, sending that to the museum or to the university, publishing a piece the next day in Die Welt, you know, the obsession of Bromberg, whatever it is, and pathologizing it, right? And then the next day you're fired, and then arrests on the street. So what I have to keep saying to myself is they're throwing this apparatus at you because something you're doing is working. So you've got to keep on doing the work.
Ini benar-benar jawaban yang jujur dan mengungkap sisi gelap di Jerman soal antisemitisme, di mana kritik dan perlawanan sering dipersepsikan sebagai ancaman. Jadi sistem di sini benar-benar nggak mau dengar suara kritis.
I think within the German context, what is just so kind of hypocritical and problematic is just of course there is rampant anti-Semitism as there are other forms of racism, but just this, you know, the concept of the importierte Antisemitismus, which of course there are, you know, people who have prejudices in every community, but when you actually look at the data, it's, the majority of them, over 80% of the crimes are white ethnic Germans, with the rise of the AfD, and this is always just the thing of like, tick box Israel, tick box, okay, we've got people 2015 coming on, so none of this is our problem anymore, and if you take all of those things away, then, Germany does actually have to deal with the fact that it never denazified, and it still does have a problem, whether that is by projecting its ethno-nationalist fantasies onto Israel, or whether it's like saying that all of the black and brown people are this, it just, the denazification just never happened in this country.
Iya, ini benar banget. Jerman sering ngelempar masalahnya ke pihak lain dan cari kambing hitam. Padahal kalau lihat data, sumber masalahnya tuh di dalam negeri sendiri. Tapi karena belum pernah benar-benar beresin warisan Nazinya, jadi mereka cari kambing hitam keluar.
So sauer.
Ya, itu dia diskusi panel yang aku datengin sama temen aku Lina. Itu perspektif dari orang Israel yang lebih ke sayap kiri. Jadi gimana menurut pendapat kalian? Kalau kalian punya pendapat, tulis di komentar. Tapi please no hate, oke?